Hello everyone, we're Group Delia. Today, our group is going to talk about a skill that's more important than ever, which is critical thinking. Let's start with a relatable scenario. Have you ever seen a viral social media post? You click it share right away, only to later learn it was completely fake, or made a quick decision out of anger or excitement, then regretted it later. That's exactly where critical thinking becomes our most powerful tool. So, what is critical thinking? It's a systematic and rational process of thinking. At its core, it means using logical analysis to process information in an evidence-based way, instead of relying on gut feelings or personal biases. It helps us achieve objective evaluation and sound decision making, while eliminate logical errors. And it's not just about picking apart old ideas. It's also a practical skill to identify and solve problems in complex, messy situations. Now, why does this matter so much? Let's look at three key benefits. First, it helps us make better decisions. By replacing emotional impulses with rational analysis, we can spot hidden risks and evaluate the true value of different options before we act. Whether it's choosing a major, managing money, or picking a career path, critical thinking keeps us from making choices we will regret. Second, it protects us from misinformation. In a world full of fake news and manipulative content, critical thinking acts as a filter. It encourages us to question the source of information, check for evidence, and avoid being misled. Third, it fosters independent thinking. It teaches us to keep an open mind even when others' opinions are completely opposite to our own. This makes us more rational, flexible, and able to grow from new perspectives. Critical thinking isn't a modern invention. It dates back to ancient Greece, shaped by three legendary philosophers. Socrates, he created the Socratic method, a way of testing logic through persistent, targeted questioning. His core belief was, I know that I know nothing. Humility is the first step to learning. He would ask people to define a concept, then guide them to discover flaws in their own reasoning. As he famously said, the unexamined life is not worth living. Self-reflection is the foundation of critical thinking. Plato, building on Socrates, Plato argued that our senses only show appearance, like shadows on a cave wall. True knowledge comes from understanding the deeper reality behind these shadows. So, critical thinking means moving beyond the surface impression and use dialogue to get closer to the truth. Aristotle, he formalized the rules of formal logic and the syllogism. He believed that if your starting premises were correct and your reasoning structure was logical, your conclusion must be true. This gave us a tool to spot logical fallacies and make our reasoning as reliable as a mathematical formula, laying the groundwork for all modern rational thought. Over centuries, critical thinking evolved far beyond the philosopher's study. In science, it became the soul of the scientific spirit. By rationally challenging established authorities like Galileo questioning the Earth's position in the universe, critical thinking drove massive leaps in human cognition, from the Industrial Revolution to modern medical breakthroughs. In policymaking, it transformed governance. Instead of making decisions based on emotion or tradition, critical thinking pushes governments to use evidence-based decision-making. Rigorous logical checks risk prediction, and field assessments of social welfare. This ensures public policies are scientific and fair, avoiding costly mistakes from blind bias. Since the 20th century, critical thinking has moved into global classrooms. In higher education, it's the cornerstone of general education. The goal is no longer to just fill students with facts, but to turn them into active thinkers, people who can question, analyze, and solve problems is in a world overflowing with information.
Okay, let's move on to the next part of our presentation. Core characteristics of critical thinking. Logical and rationality-based decisions are grounded in facts, data, and verifiable evidence, rather than intuition, gut feelings, or assumptions. Analyzing multiple perspectives, thinkers examine an issue from various angles and consider how different stakeholders view the situation to prevent narrow-minded conclusions. Reflective and skeptical, maintains a healthy level of doubt. Claims are not believed without first investigating the source and verifying validity. Open-mindedness, it requires intellectual humility, a willingness to listen to opposing arguments, and the flexibility to adjust one's stance if credible new evidence emerges. Identifying bias and logical fallacies actively works to recognize personal biases like confirmation bias and ensure arguments are not influenced by emotions or prejudices. This five-step process of critical thinking. Step 1. Identifying the problem or issue, stripping away irrelevant details or surface-level symptoms to clearly isolate the core issue. Step 2 is collecting and analyzing information, gathering relevant facts, and actively seeking credible sources to cross-reference data. Step 3, evaluating evidence and arguments, rigorously scrutinizing the validity, relevance, and logical consistencies of the gathered data. Step 4 is drawing conclusions based on logic, making a structured judgment based purely on facts rather than personal performance or emotional influence. Step 5 is applying and assessing decision effectiveness, implementing the chosen solution, and reviewing the outcomes to ensure it was the best choice. The next part is application case study and transition. This case study is about the Aham major change. In this situation, Aham was failing his engineering classes and feeling stressed. During this process, instead of the panicking, he identified the core issue, whether engineering aligned with his strengths. He collected data, transcripts, advisor feedback, and evaluated the evidence, noting he excelled in management but struggled in math. Based on the logic, he drew the conclusion to switch to business. For this result, after applying and assessing his decision, his GPA improved significantly to 3.8, confirming the process works.
This slide is about Bloom's taxonomy model. This model explains how people develop thinking skills step by step. It helps people move from simple learning to deeper and more advanced thinking. At the beginning, people first remember information and understand basic ideas. After that, they can apply the knowledge in real situations. Then they start to analyze the problem carefully, evaluate different ideas, and finally create new solutions or new opinions. This model is very useful in study and daily life because it helps people think more deeply instead of only memorizing facts. It also improves problem solving and decision making skills. For example, in a business case study, students should not only describe the company or repeat information from the textbook. They should also find the company's weakness, analyze the reasons behind the problem, and judge whether the company's strategy is effective or not. After that, students can suggest better plans or new ideas to improve the business. Another example is in classroom learning. When students read an article, they should not only understand the story, they can also think about why something happened, whether they can agree with the writer, and what should they improve. This should higher level thinking skills. Overall, Bloom's taxonomy model helps students become more independent thinker and a better problem solver. This slide talks about several critical thinking techniques. These techniques helps people think more carefully, understand the problems better, and make better decisions. The first technique is security question. This method encourages people to ask deeper questions instead of accepting information immediately. For example, we can ask questions like what is evidence? Why does this happen? Or what could happen in the future? By asking questions, people can understand the problem more carefully and avoid making quick judgments. The second technique is mind mapping. Mind maps helps people organize ideas around one main topic. People can connect related ideas with lines and branches. This makes the information easier to understand and helps people see relationships between ideas. For example, when discussing stress, a mind map can include cause, effects, and possible solutions. A third technique is SWOT analysis. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This method is often used in businesses or project planning. It helps people look at both the good and bad sides before making decisions. For example, a company can study its strengths and weaknesses and also think about future opportunities and possible risks. Its critical thinking techniques are useful in school, work, and everyday life. They help people think logically, solve problems more effectively, and make smarter decisions.
Okay, let's go to the next part, applications of critical thinking in the workplace. Critical thinking is essential in professional environments because it allows employees and managers to make reasoned judgments, solve problems systematically, and support actions with evidence rather than assumptions. In the workplace, this skill strengthens leadership capacity. improves communication quality, and promotes continuous employment. Key areas of application: management and leadership. Managers evaluate policies, identify organizational need, and make informed strategic choices. Conflict resolution. Critical thinking helps identify root causes, assess competing viewpoints, and develop fair and balanced solutions. Strategic decisions, making professionals compare alternatives, distinguish facts from assumptions, and consider long-term consequences. Innovation and process improvement. Employees question effective routines and propose evidence-based improvements that increase efficiency. Professional communication. Ideas are presented clearly, arguments are supported logically, and information is verified before action taken. Overall, critical thinking improves organizational performance by enhancing decision quality, workplace fairness, and professional integrity. Case Study 1: Solving a project delay. Sereno, a product launch project, is running 3 weeks behind schedule, creating a risk of silent dissatisfaction and possible reputational damage for the organization. Critical thinking process. The project manager gathers information from team leaders and reviews workflow data rather than reacting emotionally to the delay. The main causes are identified as overlapping tasks, unclear responsibilities, and poor task distribution. Alternative responses are compared, including overtime and reallocating work according to staff capacity. The manager considers cost, moral, and burnout risk before selecting a solution. Decision and the outcome. Overtime is rejected because it may solve the immediate problem while creating longer-term performance issues. Responsibilities are recognized. Key tasks are delegated to underutilized staff, and clear deadlines are introduced. The project recovers 2 weeks of lost time and silent trust is maintained. This case shows that effective problem solving depends on evidence, comparison of alternatives, and balanced judgments. Case Study 2: In single decision making in silent dealings. Sereno, one day before a major silent pitch, a salesperson discovers a technical flaw in the product. The situation creates pressure to either ensure for short-term gain or disclose it and protect the organization's credibility. Critical thinking process. The salesperson compares short-term benefits with long-term consequences, such as reputational harm and loss of trust. He consults an engineer team to understand the seriousness of the flaw and whether a practical workaround exists. A ethical framework is applied, emphasizing transparency, honesty, and professional responsibility. Decision and outcome. The silent is informed honesty about the flaw instead of being misled. A modified solution is proposed and the full road is delayed until the issue is responsibly addressed. The silent violates the transparency and the long-term business relationship continues. This example shows that critical thinking supports ethical, credible, and sustainable professional practice. That's all of my part.
Okay, everyone, today I will present part 6, which is about the advantages and the disadvantages of critical thinking. First, critical thinking is very important in our daily life because it helps people thinking carefully before making decisions. Instead of depending only on emotion,
emotions or opinions. People use facts, logic, and evidence to make better choices. The first advantage is that critical thinking improves decision making. People can compare information carefully before deciding something. For example, before buying a laptop, a student may compare the price, battery life, and performance instead of buying based on appearance only. This helps avoid bad decisions. The second advantage is that critical thinking reduces errors and misunderstandings. Nowadays, there is a lot of fake news on social media. Critical thinking helps people check whether information is true or reliable before believing it. For example, students usually check truth website or journals before using information in assignments. Besides that, critical thinking also improves problem-solving skills. People can analyze problems from different perspectives and find better solutions. For example, if a company has low productivity, the manager should first study the causes instead of blaming workers immediately. This can help the company solve problems more effectively. Another advantage is that critical thinking is useful in education and daily life. Students who use critical thinking can understand lessons more deeply and answer difficult questions better. It is also useful when making personal decisions, such as choosing a university or planning a future career. However, critical thinking also has some disadvantages. The first disadvantage is that it is time-consuming. Critical thinking requires people to analyze information carefully, and this process may take a long time. In urgent situations, people may not have enough time to think deeply before making decisions. The second disadvantage is overthinking. Sometimes people thinking too much and become unsure about their choices. They may continue to analyze every possibility and finally cannot make a decision confidently. Another disadvantage is that critical thinking is not always necessary. Some simple daily decisions do not need deep analysis. For example, choose what to eat for lunch is usually a simple decision. Thinking too much about small things can make life more stressful. Lastly, the effectiveness of critical thinking depends on individual skills and experience. If people do not have enough knowledge, they may misunderstand information and make no judgments. In conclusion, critical thinking has many advantages because it improves decision making, problem solving, and understanding of information. However, it also has disadvantages such as being time consuming and causing overthinking. Therefore, people should use critical thinking vastly depending on the situation. Thank you.
Well, in this section, we move from the theory to the practice of mastering critical thinking. Mastering this is not a one-time act, but a series of 5 disciplined habits. First, We must develop a reflective habit, as John Dewey established in 1933. This means moving away from reactive impulses to a state when we carefully consider the evidence supporting our beliefs. Second, we must master logical structures. By using formal logic, we ensure our arguments are valid and that our conclusions necessarily follow from our premises. Third, we practice intellectual humility. This is the willingness to admit that we don't know and to remain open to reconsidering our stance when new data arrives. First, we act as a disciplined filter. In our in our current post-truth era, we must actively identify facilities like personal attacks before accepting claims as truth. Finally, we apply a structured process by by using systematic decision making. We can solve complex life problems effectively. A perfect example is Herman's case, where he used data to align his major with his strengths, successfully raising his GPA to 3.8. By following these pillars, we transform ourselves into rational problem solvers. Okay. To end our presentation, let's look at why critical thinking is the foundation of rational living. As we have discussed, critical thinking is a systematic process. It is not just one simple step, it is an organized way of thinking that brings together logic, deep reflection, and the right mindset. From ancient Greece to modern citizens, it has always been the best tool we have to understand a complex world. The lifelong value of these skills is truly huge in our professional lives. It helps us make fewer errors and solve difficult problems with confidence. In our personal lives, it acts as a shield. It protects us from fake news and from being tricked by emotions on social media. It helps us become more thoughtful and fair members of society. I want to leave you with the final thought. Critical thinking is the essential foundation for deciding what to believe and how to act. Remember the case of Hammett. By checking his own thoughts instead of just follow his feelings, he made great decisions that improved his future. Critical thinking turns us into independent thinkers who acts on truth, not on impulse. Thank you very much for listening.
That's all for our presentation. Thank you for listening.